Most fans don't know this, but Sonic's character and stories are really different in Japan in many ways, and it's not just small localization tweaks. From unique designs to lost callbacks, mistranslations that changed entire game plots, and even his personality itself, Sonic has been altered in deep and permanent ways when brought to the West. Imagine creating a franchise, watching it become a global icon, only to see it become almost unrecognizable. For decades, Japanese and Western Sonic have evolved side by side, but in ways that sometimes barely resembled each other. So, how did this happen? What are the big changes from way back in the 90s up until present day that made Sonic's portrayal and lore different in the West? And which version is the better Sonic? This is Mr. Fascinating, and to find out, we'll go back to where it all started. From the very beginning, Sonic was designed to appeal to Western audiences, but for Sega of America, that wasn't enough. They needed Sonic to feel even more extreme, even more rebellious, and especially more marketable. Let's get this straight. Early 90s media like TV shows and commercials portrayed the character in a much more exaggerated manner than the original games and manuals. In Japan, while Sonic still had a lot of confidence, the focus of the character was much more into him being carefree, just a calm, adventurous drifter. He wasn't a show-off. He was just effortlessly cool. But in America, Sonic was loud. Sonic was in your face. Sonic had to make sure you knew he was cool. Sega leaned heavily into the 90s attitude era, making Sonic cocky, rebellious, and very arrogant. His appearance was changed into the nostalgic Greg Martin design, with his spines becoming a mohawk. Even his taste for chili dogs, that became a canon game thing, was just a gag from the Western cartoons. He was fast-talking, smirking, and anti-authority, made to shock and impress kids. Just compare this to Sonic's quiet confidence and aura in the CD anime opening. It's an entirely different kind of cool. The thing is, we can't really fault Sega for this. Would Sonic have been such a big phenomenon in America if they were faithful to the original? What we do know is that two very different Sonic identities were now growing in parallel, and the divide between them would only widen as Japan started to experiment with different designs and deeper stories. By the time of the Saturn era, Sega of Japan wanted to refresh Sonic's image, trying to make him more popular in the East. Enter Satoshi Okano, an artist at Sega, who made an entirely unique version of Sonic. His limbs were longer, his poses were dynamic, but his overall shape was still round and soft. This design wasn't just a concept. It was used in Japanese marketing material for Sonic Jam, and in the cover of the Saturn port of 3D Blast. For a brief time, this was Sonic's official look in Japan, which is really fascinating. But most Western fans never saw it because before this new look could be fully embraced, Sega moved on. By the time Sonic Adventure launched on the Dreamcast, Sega had introduced what we know today as the modern Sonic design by Yuji Wakawa, and Okano's Sonic was quietly forgotten. Although Sonic's appearance was now globally unified, the games started to have more complex stories, and a lot of stuff got lost in translation. When a game is localized, small adaptations are expected, but in Sonic's case, entire lore details were never revealed, and even character personalities were altered. In Japan, modern Sonic has a much more humble personality. He's also far more relaxed, which is why you often see him napping in Sonic X. His characterization in the Japanese version of Sonic Adventure is a good example.
I think you should be his bodyguard a little while.
What?
Doesn't matter, we'll just tag along.
No way!
Come on, don't run away! ちょっとの間ボディーガードしてよ。ダメだって言ってもついてくわよ。
しょうがないな。
あきっと。
While the English dub adds a lot of quips, in the original, he barely makes any jokes in the entire game. There are also huge key differences in the way other characters and plot points were translated. In the Japanese script of Sonic Adventure 2, Professor Gerald explicitly states that he had full control over Shadow's memories, making it clear that Shadow's perception of the past was deliberately altered. The English version changes this to making his mind perfect and pure, a much vaguer phrasing that leads to different interpretations. This mistranslation caused decades of debate among Sonic fans. Was Shadow's memory just foggy from stasis, or was he deliberately brainwashed? The truth was there all along. In the original Japanese script, this has insane implications for how we see Shadow's character, as it basically confirms that his memories weren't real. Of course, as of Sonic X Shadow Generations, this has been retconned, but it's still really fascinating. A similar case of lost nuance happens in Sonic Heroes. In Japanese, Metal Overlord refers to Sonic as my loathsome other other self, which suggests that he views Sonic as a reflection of what he himself is meant to be. The English version changes this to "my loathsome copy," which gives the impression that Metal delusionally believes he is the original and that Sonic is the fake. However, Metal knows he isn't the original. There is even a really nice callback to Adventure 2 that was lost. When Sonic meets Shadow again for the first time after his supposed death, their dialogue is supposed to call back to their battle on the Ark. So, in the English dub, it would reference the "I die hard" line, but the translators missed that detail. Interestingly, as the modern era progressed into Sonic 06 up to Unleashed and Black Knight, the localization stayed closer to the original Japanese scripts. That's why in these games, Sonic is more subdued and introspective. Like in his Japanese portrayal, it's not a writing inconsistency, but more of a translation one. One of the most extreme localization changes happened in Sonic Forces. In the Japanese script, Sonic was never tortured. That detail was entirely added in the English version to give the story a darker edge. Another key difference is Tails' characterization. In English, it's implied he had an emotional breakdown after Sonic's supposed defeat, while in Japanese, he doesn't lose it at all. He simply chose to go into hiding to avoid conflict. Even back in the classic era, there was already key information being removed from the Japanese manuals. Sonic being born on Christmas Island, the tornado being Sonic's plane, and chaos being foreshadowed with the legend of a dragon were all in Sonic 1, 2, and 3's manuals. All of these examples highlight just how much Sonic's portrayal and lore have been changed and misunderstood after decades of translation choices. But in 2022, something happened that flipped this entire process on its head. For the first time in Sonic history, a mainline game was written in English first. That game was Sonic Frontiers, and it was penned by Ian Flynn, one of the most beloved Sonic comic writers. This meant that the Japanese script was the localized version, which was made by the game director, Morio Kishimoto. It's a complete reversal of how things had always been done. Despite being written in English first, there were still differences in tone between the English and Japanese versions of Frontiers. One key example is Sonic's tone when interacting with Sage. In English, Sonic treats Sage with a mix of animosity and teasing. In Japanese, he sounds much gentler and more thoughtful. The game was also overall less referential and more introductory, as Sega wanted to capture a new audience in Japan. It's why Sage says Sonic the Hedgehog instead of just Sonic, and why Stick's character is not referenced at all. So, after decades of changes, which version of Sonic is the best, English or Japanese? Well, besides blatant missing story beats and plot points, the truth is, there is no right answer. Sonic's core character remains the same. It's just the way he expresses himself. Whether through confidence and wisecracks or quiet determination, that changes the most. But no matter what version you prefer, one thing remains the same. Sonic is Sonic. We really have to thank fans like Windy for translating the Japanese scripts and making them widely available. The great irony is, even though Sonic is so different in Japan, he isn't really liked over there at all. In fact, Sonic is almost completely unknown in Japan. And if you want to understand Sega's big mistakes that led to this, click on this video before it disappears forever.